In the beginning of 2025, I owned a home in Florida. I had a full-time corporate job, a mortgage, furniture, routines, responsibilities. But instead of feeling settled, I started feeling trapped. My housing costs were nearly $6,000 a month, and only about $1,300 of that was actually paying down the principal. So one day, I asked myself a question that changed everything. Is this house giving me freedom, or is it taking it away? So I sold it. And now, at 60, I'm starting over in France. Hi, I'm Karen, and welcome to Designing Freedom. This channel is about my journey from Florida to Europe, building the freedom to work less and live more. I was born in Africa, I built a career in America, and now I'm creating a new chapter in Europe. I'm not retired, I'm not living on a fantasy budget. I still work full-time for a US company remotely while I explore how to build a life with more flexibility, less stress, and more choice. This first video is about why I left Florida, why I sold my home, and why I decided that freedom from a regular job mattered more to me than owning a house. For a long time, I loved owning my home. It felt secure. It felt like a solid long-term investment. And more than that, it was my happy place. But in Florida, the numbers started to become harder and harder to justify. Between the mortgage, property taxes, homeowners insurance, and HOA fees, I was paying close to $6,000 a month. What really made me stop and think was this. Only about $1,300 of that was actually reducing the loan balance. The rest was going to interest, insurance, taxes, and fees. I still believe that home ownership can be a fundamentally sound investment. But that assumes that the numbers make sense. It assumes that the cost of owning is reasonable in relation to the equity you're building and the life you want to live. In my case, the monthly costs had become so high that the house no longer felt like freedom. It felt like something I had to keep feeding. And those costs were not getting better. Insurance kept rising with every hurricane season. Property taxes had risen as property values increased, and HOA fees had gone up too. Everything about owning that home felt more expensive, more stressful, and less like a nest egg. At some point, I had to ask myself, if most of the money is disappearing into costs, and only a small part is building equity, is owning still the wiser choice? For me, in this season of life, the answer is no. Renting, investing the proceeds, and keeping my life flexible began to feel wiser than owning a home that limited my choices. I began to realize that a house can be an asset, but it can also become an anchor. And I wanted movement. I wanted options. I wanted freedom. There were emotional reasons too. I lived in Florida to be close to my daughter and her family. And it's very important to me. I love my family, and being near them really does matter. But Florida itself never really felt like home. I've never liked the heat and humidity. I know some people love it, but for me, it's something I endured rather than enjoyed. And over time, I also started feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the political and social climate around me. I reached a point where I didn't feel that the life I was living matched the life that I wanted to create. I started asking myself, what if I didn't have to keep living this way? What if I didn't need to own another house right now? What if the money tied up in my Florida home could become the foundation for something more flexible? A life where I could travel, I could visit family, learn new languages, explore new places, and eventually reduce my dependence on a full-time corporate job. I wasn't trying to escape responsibility. I was trying to design a more intentional life. I realized I would rather have freedom from a regular job than own a home. The other important piece of the story is work. I work remotely for a company based in California, and that gives me a great opportunity. I can work from Florida. I can work from anywhere. As long as I have reliable internet and work the necessary hours, my job does give me flexibility. So I'm not tied to Florida by my job. I was tied to Florida by the obligations of owning a house. Once I saw that clearly, I was eager to make a change. So I made the decision to sell my house. Not because I had every answer, not because I had a perfect plan, and not because I knew exactly where I would end up. I sold it because I realized I would rather have the path to freedom from a regular job than own a house. And that was a turning point for me. I decided to use the funds from the sale of my home to build investments and opportunities that would eventually allow me to work less and to live more. Now, the funny thing is, France was not actually my first plan. My first plan was to buy a small hotel in the Scottish Highlands. I spent 5 months working towards it, and it was very close to moving forward. But I'll tell that full story in another video because it deserves its own chapter. But that disappointment is what eventually led me to France. Today, I'm living in France on a long stay visa. I study French every morning at Alliance Française in Normandy. And then I work remotely for my job in the afternoons and evenings on East Coast time. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm actively building my life. I'm not just maintaining a life, I'm designing. I'm exploring where I might want to live, how I want to invest, what kind of community I want, what kind of future I want to create. This channel is not about having everything figured out. It's about the process of figuring it out. It's about relocation, remote work, learning French, investing for flexibility, and asking what freedom really means at this stage of life. In the next video, I'll tell you how I nearly bought that hotel in Scotland and why the plan fell apart just before it was about to happen. If you've ever wondered whether it's too late to start over, whether you could live abroad, or whether there might be a different way to design the next chapter of your life, I hope you'll subscribe and follow along. I'll be sharing the real journey, relocation, remote work, French school, finances, investing for flexibility, and the search for where I truly belong. I'm Karen, and this is Designing Freedom. From Florida to Europe, building the freedom to work less and live more.